Hi, Beverly. Thanks for joining us. Sam the Goal. Good to see you. Good to see you on. Guys, for those of you who are joining us this evening, I'm going to be chatting to Damien Mander. Damien Mander is the founder of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation and also the Akashinga, an all-female armed anti-poaching unit that are based up in Zimbabwe and are literally responsible for protecting Zimbabwe's resources. So let's see if we can get Damien on and get cracking on with this live. He's going to be joining us all the way from Zim. We did a brief video call, so we think we might luck out with our reception. There he is. How's it, Damien?
Oh, good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, good to talk to you.
Likewise, hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Where are you currently chatting to me from?
My son's bedroom.
Okay, nice.
No, I'm in Harare, Zimbabwe. So just got back from the bush and just chilling back here. As you can see, I'm pretty rugged up. It's pretty cold, and I haven't lit the fire yet. So
Nice one. Yeah, we're currently experiencing quite a storm here in Cape Town. It's just hit us, but we're quite grateful for this weather because we've had 3 years of very little water in this area.
yeah, I know it. Hey, yeah, well, good to hear, man.
So have you spent the majority of your time in Harare now during lockdown, or have you been out in the field?
Like for the first, I suppose the first month and a half. I spent most of my time here, and then I've just been out in the field going around, checking on our projects and also scoping new projects. We went through just before lockdown. We sort of saw this thing coming, and we spent probably a 10 to 14 day period. We just made a massive amount of changes throughout the whole organisation, cut back on all non-essential expenditure, wound back projects that like construction projects that we could put a break on, and we cut our expenditure of about 40% over a very short space of time. Management took huge cuts in pay. Our rangers, we haven't laid a single person off in the last
Good for you.
3.5 months, and none of our rangers or few operational staff have taken any pay cuts at all. So yeah, and then that's the admin side. Also having to change the way that we operate, sending our pickets out into isolation for extended periods so they're not interacting with each other. And then fundraising. One of the first things to go when things get tough is philanthropic giving. So
Yeah.
we had a war chest of money that we said, because we've been acquiring these long-term land leases for all these other former hunting areas, and we're in the process of moving into those. So our expansion has slowed somewhat, and the war chest for expansion has become more of a war chest for survival, and I suppose more strategic allocation in terms of special investigations, trying to put the limited amount of resources we can get into the most effective places.
Yeah, it's a really tough time. We've spoken to a number of NGOs on the ground, and I think, even for you to still have boots on the ground and patrols happening, it's a big deal, because at the moment, not only are organizations affected, but we're seeing a rise in crime, organized crime and conservation crime, aren't we?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, since this has started, we've basically our ivory seizures, to use that as a keystone indication of our arrests, have trebled. So last month we had 41 sets of ivory that we recovered. In one 14-day period there, we had 8 separate successful ivory operations where we intercepted ivory that was being trafficked.
No ways. I'm delighted to talk to you tonight, because we've crossed paths a couple of times, but I've never really got to know you, or obviously worked with you on the ground. And for those of you who don't know Damien, he founded the International Anti-Poaching Foundation a number of years ago, and we're going to be talking a little bit about I guess his narrative and how you ended up in Zimbabwe. And also the Akashingas. So if you guys are interested in that, stay tuned. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions. We'll try and get to them if we can. And I guess, Damien, it would be really, I guess, interesting to find out. I know you've got a, really interesting past. You've got a background in the military, and just wanted to chat to you a little bit about, how you ended up, in the military first of all, and from there into Africa.
So I'm an Aussie. In case you didn't pick up by the poor use of the English language there. So grew up on the coastline, fell in love with the ocean, was always diving as a kid, and free diving, snorkeling, and scuba diving. And I suppose for any kid that wants to go on and be a diver, the ultimate job is to be a Navy diver. And joined the Australian military, became a Navy diver. September 11, after that, there was a special operations unit that was created as Australia's, I suppose, what they termed the first and last resort for a terrorist attack on home soil. Went across there into water platoon as a diver, very quickly taken across into sniper platoon, off to Iraq for 3 years, saved up a bunch of money, took a year off for sabbatical in 2008, and just trying to figure out the what next, and had heard about anti-poaching and read too much Wilbur Smith growing up, and Africa seemed like a romantic 6-month adventure. And I suppose in a way my life up until then had been about what Damien wanted to do and what was cool and fun, and was actually coming over here, and I came here for the wrong reasons. I came looking for a fight, not a cause, and it was about going out and having that adventure and this anti-poaching side of things. And then the two things that got me was, the first one was Rangers. Having come from working within such huge budgets in the military, and we're just part of a system that destroyed a country and a culture, to protect some oil in the ground, and being a part of that function, and then seeing Rangers who's doing such a noble job, looking after the heart and lungs of the planet, and struggling to get basic training or basic equipment, and just, I suppose, really made me reflect on who I was, and how I could do something more constructive with the only two things I had, which was a certain set of skills and some money. And in parallel to that was seeing animals, having been a hunter in my teenage years, then being the hunted one in Iraq, and then coming to Africa and seeing animals just trying to go about their business, of being animals. Animals want the same thing as us. They want to live, and we as a species, we continually take that away from them. So those two things in parallel with each other, seeing the Rangers, who just inspired me, I suppose, inspired me to realize there's more to life than running around looking for the next adventure. And animals, it's just, I don't know, it wasn't some form of, trying to make up for things that I'd done in the past. It was like, okay, a bunch of years in Iraq and being part of that system, a bit of age and experience will give you a different lens through which to see the world. And I was ready for something different, and conservation was it.
And those years in Iraq, I mean, obviously, I've actually managed to find one or two pictures. I don't know if you can see them reflecting on your screen there. Can you see that picture I've just brought up? I found another great picture over there. I mean, you're an absolute moose, man. And I guess at this stage in your life, you're a youngster, right? I mean, you can't be much older than, I guess, in your late teens, early 20s.
I think in that picture there, I've always managed to actually look older than I am. I think in that picture I was about 26, 27. So
okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you obviously, I mean, you did this. You did this for the money, right? I mean, I read a little bit about you, and initially when you were a youngster, you were ambitious. You were wanting to invest. You wanting to make a name for yourself, and you decided, you wanted a bit of adventure, and you would go off to the military.
Yeah, I mean, Australia's a very highly paid military, second highest paid in the world, and then in Iraq as a private contractor, earning up to $250,000 a year, which transferring back into Australia, which is a relative conversion, is about $400,000, which it'd be the same as 4 million rand.
Huge, yeah.
Getting big bucks. And I mean, fortunately, I was guided from a young age. All the money I didn't waste, I put into residential property at a time when Australia was going through quite a big property boom. So just sort of set me up in a position. By the time I left Iraq, I didn't actually need to work again for the foreseeable future. And if I'd probably been a bit smarter, I probably would have spent it a bit more wisely. You know, you see a lot of people that start up not-for-profit organisations and get investors to go in, but I believed in what we were doing and believed in the different trajectory that I'd set for myself and the start of this organisation. And I don't do things in halves, so I sold everything and put it into getting this going.
Amazing. And when you first came to Africa, just to take a step back, I mean, again, it was adventure. Why Africa? And I guess the second question to that is how did you end up actually joining an anti-poaching unit? It's funny, you know, in the past I've had, and I'm sure you have it a lot, in terms of guys who have got military background looking to do something different. And I think there are quite a few people who are looking to get into conservation. But I mean, you did this a number of years ago when it was all still quite new.
I get an email a day from a guy like the person I used to be, and that was wanting to come over and run around and do this cool romantic job. And it was actually, you know, I started in South Africa and just traveling around, spending time with people on the ground. And you start to learn that there's people there that have been doing it for decades, and they've built long-term relationships with local communities. They've got a system that works, and some guy with a military CV wanted to come over and run around the bush and have their own adventures. It doesn't fit in. And so, I mean, that all for me was a learning curve. It was an experience, and it's all part of a process to get to where we are. You know, we're all products of our own journey, and that was part of mine. It was eventually, having spent 6 months traveling around and seeing the work of rangers, that I got to start with an organisation in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and that was it. You know, it was the opportunity to see what just the smallest of things, just a bit of attention, a bit of training, and some basic equipment to rangers could mean. And that for me was enough of a, you know, combined with some other factors, enough of a catalyst to say, listen, there's a difference that can be made here.
And you know, for those who kind of understand the space a little bit, I mean, literally, did you just go and, you know, speak to people in terms of try and infiltrate an anti-poaching unit and spend time on the front line doing what you wanted to do? Yeah,
I did. And the advice I give to all the people that email me now and say, oh, yeah, I want to get involved, and it's well, separate yourself. You know, make yourself one of the part of the 1%, not the 99%. And the 1% that wants to get on a plane and come over here and sit around the campfire and meet the people and try and build those relationships. And I suppose I'm fortunate that I'd sent a bunch of emails before I got here. I didn't get a single response. And so I suppose, in a way, that's what, you know, people that want to get involved, that's what sets you apart. Come over and actually take the first step, take the first leap. And when I came, I got on a flight. I didn't even have a check-in bag. I carry-on luggage and a one-way ticket. And, you know, that didn't really there was no plan B, really.
You know, I guess there's so many skill sets that we need in Africa. So like you say, for those who are, you know, interested in getting involved, offer that skill set that's lacking in a certain area or organization. In these, I mean, you were obviously on the front line. You were going out on patrols every day. You know, you would have learned a lot. And at the same time, you would have probably seen some pretty horrific things with regards to human-induced injuries caused to animals. I'm sure this had an impact on you as well. Anything that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, it was a culmination of a bunch of things, and then I mean the final, I mean the catalyst for me. We were patrolling one day and we saw a buffalo that she'd been caught in a snare. For those that are watching, may not know that wire snares, like these big loops, these traps that poachers will put across game tracks. And here you can see a picture there. That's a buffalo. It's got one trapped around its head. Well,
is this it, or is this is one I just found on your Instagram? Was this the buffalo you were referring to?
No, the one that was part of my journey was she was, a female. The Cape buffalo is one of the most feared animals. There was a female, and she had her back leg caught in a wire snare. She was on the ground. The rangers could look at the ground, and they read the ground the same way that we read the front page of the newspaper, as a language, as a story. And they said she'd been there for 3 days struggling, and close enough we could hear bones crunching in her hips, and that's where she'd ripped her pelvis apart. And we had no choice but to euthanize her. And as we did that, she started giving birth to a stillborn calf, and that was I don't know. Having lived the past decade that I'd lived, and I don't know, just some things affect you in a different way, and you got to take that as a message and a calling. And that for me is the birth of that still calf was not to be too philosophical, a rebirth for me.
And I interrupted you. I'm sorry. For those of you, Damien was just explaining the snare, and you can see in this image exactly how the snares worked. And it's literally like a wire noose that tightens with, the more the animal struggles, and it leads to a long and festering death. And obviously, something that you witnessed that will stay with you for the rest of your life. But not a nice way to go. So you spent a couple of years, or was it a year, in Africa, and from there you decided, listen, you're going to sell up all your assets, all the assets you had acquired over all those years, and start a foundation and do something that you believed in.
I think I arrived in February, and on the 13th of October 2009, the same year, we registered the IAPF as a trust in Zimbabwe. That was it, hey? Haven't looked back. So we've since registered in South Africa, Kenya, the USA, Australia. Done a lot of work in Mozambique. The way we turned into, I suppose, a global entity is it was March 2012, and the Australian newspaper, which is our version of the Washington Post, released a front page story about Australian Special Forces spies operating in Zimbabwe. And I was out of the country at the time, and asked to come back and answer questions in relation to espionage. And I was just told, if you go back, it's not going to be good. So I just finished investing my life savings into a country I couldn't return to. Ended up living I was in a backpackers with no money in Kempton Park, having to rebuild my life from scratch, and an organisation that had just had its projects and future shut down. We registered as a not-for-profit in South Africa. We scoped a project along the Kruger border in Mozambique. We ended up getting that contract. To fund that contract, we registered in the USA as a charity, and just things just escalated very quickly from there. So a really shitty situation that I would suppose some people would just pack up and go home and say, that maybe this isn't for me. It actually, we took that and used it as fuel to turn us into the global organisation we are today.
Amazing, man. I take my hat off to you, and I can see a lot of our viewers just throwing all sorts of accolades, and great comments, talking to your perseverance. So the International Anti-Poaching Foundation is what, in layman's terms? How would you describe the foundation? What is your vision for the foundation?
We started off as a service provider, going around giving training, just trying to be the last line of defence for nature. Started off with quite a militarized view on stopping poaching, and just evolved over time organically. It probably took us 7 years to realize what it is we should be doing, and now we've refined our approach to two main programs. The first one is Lead Ranger, and our objective now, our mission, is preserving large ecosystems within key ecoregions, and the rich biodiversity within those areas. But the first approach is Lead Ranger, based out of Tsavo National Park in Kenya, and we train people that show good leadership qualities within existing conservation networks. We've got clients like the Kenyan Wildlife Service, we've got the Uganda Wildlife Authority, Big Life Foundation, Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. So we basically, they give us the best people they have, and we train them to be instructors, and it turns learning into a full-time potential within their workplace, as opposed to having to bring in an external instructor or to send their guys away to be trained. So far, we've trained 44 instructors that oversee a ranger force of 1,100 people with an area of over 14 million acres. And that's it's something I'm very proud of. It's something we're replicating. I think it's a program that tries to move away from having guys like myself come out and deliver expensive training to putting the ownership of learning back into focus within Indigenous capacity building. The second approach we have is Akashinga, nature protected by women, and that is what we're doing is building a portfolio of land areas that have formerly been used as trophy hunting, for trophy hunting. Now, trophy hunting is a declining industry, and I'll say north of South Africa, so across much of Africa, where you've got an area collectively the size of Texas or France that's been set aside for hunting. You've got reduced wildlife populations. You've got a shifting policy and regulations surrounding the export of trophies such as elephant ivory. And then you've got a generation raised on social media that just doesn't seem to want to fly across the world to shoot something anymore. And what that means is the economic model of trophy hunting is no longer viable for so many areas. And for us, we don't want to go into national parks. We don't want to go into areas that are working, where there's a dozen other NGOs vying to support or work. We want the lost causes, because the lost causes are the best ones worth fighting for. And so that's what we do. We've been acquiring large tracts of land that have basically been abandoned by the trophy hunting industry. They're owned under a community land trust, so our partnerships are in direct relation with local communities. They're long-term partnerships. The shortest period we have is 20 years, the longest is 50. And the model for protecting these areas completely shifts the whole dynamic of conservation. We put women's empowerment at the center of our strategy. It gives us the greatest traction in community development. And dollar for dollar, it's the single most effective dollar that can be spent on rural community development. There's an overwhelming body of evidence that tells us empowering women is the single greatest force for positive change in the world today. And that's what this program does. It empowers women, which builds communities. The byproduct of that becomes conservation. We have, instead of having an anti-poaching unit working against a community trying to stop them from coming in to poach, we have a community that sees the benefits of what we're doing, and they say we want to be a part of that long term. So we're strategic about the land areas that we select. They are abandoned, but they also form what we don't want to do is islands of success within larger ecosystems that are failing. Our work along the Zambezi Valley spans the lower Zambezi as well as the Sibungwe region. We started with one reserve just south of Mana Pools, a World Heritage listed site. We now have 6 different reserves under contract. We've got another 7 in Zimbabwe that we've tendered for, as well as 3 in Botswana. So we have a massive area footprint with an ambition to scale to 20 reserves by 2025 with a small legion of 1,000 women protecting those areas.
Amazing. And with regards to the land use, what is you say you obviously there used to be trophy hunting concessions. Are they being used for tourism at all now? Or what is the land use practice?
At the moment, we're just simply protecting them. And so previously, we replicated the same mistakes we made in Iraq. In Iraq, I was part of a management team whose job was to recruit, train, equip and deploy battalion-sized groups of paramilitary police across the country. And we recruited those people from areas, all different places, and we formed them up and we sent them out. to protect different towns. And everywhere we sent them, we caused chaos. And what I saw in conservation when we got here was a similar model. It was that rangers were often recruited from areas that they were not being deployed to. And we did that too in Zimbabwe. If Denmark rates #1 in the world, Zimbabwe rates 160 out of 180 countries on the Global Corruption Index. And one of the reasons we recruited from abroad was to avoid corruption, collusion between rangers and the communities they grew up with. And with the women, when we started to recruit women, and I'll say this 3 years down the track, as we scale, we haven't had a single incidence of corruption. What that does,
unbelievable.
It allows us to continually recruit directly from the community alongside the area we're trying to protect. The largest line items in our budget are ranger salaries. It turns our biggest investment in conservation into a community investment, and it's not one that's coming in at council level. It's one that's coming in at household level into the hands of women. On paper, we're putting the same amount of money into the community every 34 days as what trophy hunting was doing per annum.
Incredible.
The bottom line then triple gears because a woman spends 80 to 90% of her income on family and local community versus a male that spends 30 to 40%. So we have a viable economic alternative to trophy hunting, which in our case study is only working with women at the center of the strategy. And people say, well, there's no commercial aspect to what you're doing. And I'll say, well, the market spaces that we get money from are existing market spaces. It's a philanthropic approach that we're having. But there's 2.5 times more funding for women's empowerment in Africa than there is for conservation. We're a viable economic alternative to trophy hunting, so we open up access into animal rights funding. The entire program is plant-based or vegan. It's the fastest growing food sector in the United States, which is our biggest or the world's biggest philanthropic market. And then we get conservation funding. So you combine all that together and it's a far bigger market space than the trophy hunting industry. And I think we've got a much better story to sell.
That's amazing. So you founded the Akashinga in 2017. What was the inspiration behind that? I mean, we all know it's I guess a male-dominated or was a male-dominated industry. I guess there are 1 or 2 other organizations out there, but the Akashinga are the only all-female anti-poaching unit that are actually armed and on the front line, correct?
Yeah. As far as I know, it's... We looked at other case studies in the industry where women were given certain access but not full access. We then looked at other industries that were getting ahead by getting more women into management positions on boards as CEOs. And conservation women are generally outnumbered in the field at a ratio of around somewhere between 75 and 100 to 1. And some will say, we've got more women out there, but those women are generally riding desks or stuck on checkpoints or walking fence lines. What we wanted to know is if we put women into every role, what would happen? I wasn't convinced, and it took some convincing for our board of directors to take what many would perceive as a risk. And the final catalyst for me was an article in the New York Times about the US Army Rangers putting women through their training in preparation for deployment. And a decade before I read that article, my life was saved in northern Baghdad after getting blown up on a routine mission and basically surrounded by local militia. US Army Rangers got us out of that situation, got us back home. So reading that article, thinking if the unit that's good and gracious enough to have saved my life is now putting women through to be Army Rangers, maybe we should give women an opportunity to be wildlife rangers as well. And I mean a full opportunity, not just putting weapons in their hand and a uniform on their back and taking pictures for fundraising, but let's throw them out there, let's put them in harm's way and see what they come back with.
So I guess knowing the African culture or growing up in Africa, it would have probably been quite an interesting notion for, the men of, the particular villages the women were coming from to acknowledge. How were they initially received? Firstly, from, I guess, their colleagues in the similar industry and from the men back home.
So the initial criteria that we put out. So when I arrived in Zimbabwe, the life expectancy for a woman was 34 years of age. It was the lowest life expectancy in the world. And so when we started this program, we thought, let's provide an opportunity for those that need it the most. So the criteria for selection was survivors of serious sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers, and abandoned wives. And we put that out, and then we had to negotiate with traditional leaders, with the chief, with the local councillors, and this is what we want to do. And look, I'm telling you, it took some serious negotiation just to be able to start a selection process. But they gave us a green light to do it with a very small window. And then we sat through 87 interviews, which I'll say is some of the toughest stories I've ever had to hear.
I can imagine.
And it's horrific. And each of them had their cellbox, the village heads sitting there verifying the stories that they were telling. And on their way down, they were told to piss off back home. They're told to go back to the village, back to the kitchen, back to the fields, back to the family where they belong. And they still stuck their head down and they came. And then we started the selection. We chose 37 and we started the selection. And I've built a career across 3 continents in training hard men, in trying to break them, in preparation for deployment on the front lines. And I suppose when we set our criteria for the women that would come through this program, what we didn't realise is we're actually getting the toughest. And I don't mean the toughest of the women, I mean the toughest of society. We thought we were putting them through hell. The reality was what we were putting them through was nothing compared to what they came from or stood to go back to.
Unbelievable. And I mean, we know from firsthand of working with, folks like yourself in terms of selection courses, they are not for sissies. So I guess for you, was there any, was it quite challenging all of a sudden having to shift from training men to women? I mean, was it a challenge for yourself personally?
I'd never worked with women, never trained with women. The units I came from, special operations, Ultimate Boys Club, I'd never experienced it. Halfway through day one of doing selection with the women, we pulled the instructors aside and said, "Hey, all right, guys, we got something here." And everyone knew it. We all knew it straight away. The harder we pushed the women, the more they smiled. And we knew that the responsibility shifted from them in proving to us that they were worthy to be there into us. Okay, we need to prepare these women to get ready for the front lines. And the areas they were going out to, the lower to mid Zambezi, is not much different from Kruger in terms of the intensity there. From 2001 to 2016, 8,000 elephants had been killed. 8,000 times teams of armed poachers had come in there willing to kill elephants or people standing in their way. So, I mean, this is not like some little game reserve that they're going out to protect. This is going out right out there into the heart of one of the largest elephant populations left on the planet and one of the most targeted. So, while we could hope for the best in terms of what this program would bring about for community development and women's empowerment, we actually had to prepare for the worst.
What are some of the challenges they face in terms of, I guess, poachers? I guess most people don't realize, there are different types of poachers. You've got subsistence poachers, bushmeat poachers, and in I guess many of your areas of operation, you've got big syndicates that are hunting and killing both rhino and elephant illegally. So what are some of these challenges that they face with regards to these poachers?
I mean, so initially it was a social challenge. I mean, not just to focus on the challenges of poaching, but the challenges of the program. Initially, there was social challenges with the communities and the men being frustrated that not only that the available jobs had gone to women, but that women were doing a job that is traditionally held by a man. Almost 3 years later, there's been an amazing form of social engineering where those that may not still like the fact that the women have the job, after 194 arrests that the women have made, they damn well respect it. Speaking with the chief of police, they told us that since the program started, there's been a 60% reduction in rape cases in these communities. Women seeing or being inspired by what these women do and how they stand up for themselves, and young boys, young girls being inspired by them. So there's the social side of the program. The poaching side, I mean, poachers have become an endangered species in the area. Whether it's bushmeat poaching or ivory poaching, the distances that these women are travelling to make arrests are getting further and further afield, and that's as a result of a growing intelligence network. Look, none of us enjoy arresting people. It's not the fun part of the job. It's not the fun part for the women. They just want to live and build, live in and build harmonious relationships in a community they want to raise their family in. But at a certain point, and beyond the lower Zambezi and beyond Zimbabwe, we're in a global community where we're heading towards 8 billion people. At the moment, we've got hundreds of thousands of people dead. We've got millions of people infected. We've got billions of people in lockdown, and we're looking at global deficits, economic deficits in the trillions of dollars. And that is because of our lack of respect for nature. And at some point, we need to draw a line in the sand and say, if we don't hold on to what we have left at any cost, then we're the endangered one. We're on a rock in space that's been spinning for over 5 billion years, survived a far lot worse than human beings, and we'll continue to do so. And we need to wake up and take the lessons from this pandemic that protecting nature is Earth's self-regulating system, and in many ways, rangers are not just the last line of defense for nature; they're the last line of defense for humanity. And that's the stance we've got to take, regardless of what the poaching type is. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate to see people get a mandatory sentence of 9 years for elephant poaching, but the consequences of if we don't stand up and hold on to this, then it's going to be the end.
And it's hard to believe. You'd think about the lower Zambezi or Mana pools, for that matter. I mean, it used to be full of black rhino. We've certainly seen a massive decline with regards to some of the high-profile species like elephant and rhino in your area of operation. I'm talking Zimbabwe now. With regards to the situation now, the poaching crisis as a whole during lockdown, have you guys had many issues at all?
Yeah, there's definitely been a spike in poaching. I don't know how to actually do this Instagram live thing and throw some data slides up for you, but there's been a sharp upward curve in poaching and arrests and seizures, and just it's I don't know how long it's going to go. You can assume the whole tourism season is going to be wiped out, and who knows when international travel is going to open up again. So, along with a decline in philanthropic giving, an upturn in opportunities for poachers to go and do what they want, a downturn in conservation capabilities because of a lack of funding, and then an upturn in desperation of people just trying to get food. It's a perfect storm for a shit time for nature, for wildlife, on the coattails of misery that put us into this pandemic in the first place. We're here because of wildlife or animals ending up in these wet markets, and now because of that, because of the way we've treated animals, animals have to take it again. And so it's we're doing everything we can. We got campaigns running at the moment, COVID crisis campaigns to try and expand our operations. We're everywhere we go. We've been very successful and very strategic. My background, special operations. We get big jobs done with minimal fuss and minimal resources, and that's how we run as an organisation. Going out, getting big jobs done without, the better you are, the less you need. That's how we function.
And it's not just about going out and catching poachers, is it? It's about collecting intelligence. It's about long hours in the field, and obviously these women, the Akashinga, have kind of dedicated their lives and time to making a difference.
So when the women first came in, we didn't say, here's a uniform, here's a rifle, we'll give you the training, go out and protect this area. The first thing we asked them is what are your dreams? What do you want to do in life? Where do you want to go? And for these women, as part of this program, it's an opportunity for them to do whatever they want. And we build career paths for these women, and we want to have them with us as rangers for 5 years. Give them any education that they want, and then send them out into something bigger and better. But what it is, it's also a home for them to return to if things aren't working out. We've got women that have gone on to university. We've got women that have finished their high school diplomas, women that have bought land, built houses, gotten their families back together, women that have gone to Kenya and trained to be instructors. We've got women that are just proud to put their hand up and say, I've got a driver's license as a woman in rural Zimbabwe, which not many can do. And that for us, it's about building these communities and developing a long-term plan for uplifting these areas through the education that we can give these women. And that for us is the solution for conservation. The UN Population Division tells us there's going to be 2 billion people on this continent by 2040. If we don't figure out a way to get the communities on side, then we're not going to win. And in a way, to look at what's going on in the US at the moment with the law enforcement side and the antagonistic approach there. In a way, a small group of women in the Zambezi Valley have achieved what few armies or police departments in history have ever done, and that is to win the hearts and minds of a local community. And if you can win the hearts and minds, it's far more important than biceps or bullets or any other military hardware you can buy.
And I guess, I think it's just such a fantastic idea of being able to employ women from the local communities, because what they're going to do is they're going to go back into their communities. They're the pillars of their communities, and they're going to put a value on, these natural resources. There's an image here of, some women chatting to kids. And I guess not only are they protecting wildlife, but they're going back into the community and educating the next generation about the importance of their natural resources.
Yeah. The women in those, there's Tracy, there's Primrose, and Abigail. And those women in the early 20s, they just finished in these schools a few years earlier. And they go back, they're literally like rock stars and awesome, inspiration. And we just made a documentary with National Geographic and James Cameron. And when we set out to make the documentary, it wasn't something to entertain the West. It was something to inspire other women in Africa to say, look at what's possible. And I think these women have become absolute role models. And in many ways, in a selfish way, I've become a student. I've learned so much from them and shifted so much of what I thought I knew, not only about conservation, but about law enforcement and how to get communities on side into a way that becomes the most powerful asset you can hope for in conservation.
That's amazing. And I've been reading a couple of interesting articles talking to, I guess, the difference between women and men. And I think you've even mentioned in an interview or two, you've actually even in the field noticed animals reacting differently to women than men. You talked about, obviously, the fact that they're almost incorruptible. There are a lot of, according to your model, there are a lot of ups in terms of, putting a focus with regards to working with women over men.
There's been a bunch of things that we didn't anticipate. The first one was corruption, which we just haven't. They're either really brilliant liars, or we just haven't had a single incidence of corruption yet. I think it's the latter. The second one is women naturally de-escalate tension. So as opposed to having an ongoing war or conflict, they build interpersonal relationships with the communities they were raised in, the communities that their parents were raised in, and the communities they're going to raise their own family in. And nobody wants to raise their family in conflict. So they have a natural tendency to de-escalate tension, and that is a very valuable tool. They look at their weapons as a tool, something to be used as a last resort in a shit situation, not something to be used as a toy to wave around as part of an ego trip. They are brilliant at collecting information around the world in law enforcement. Across the board in law enforcement, about 3% approximately of crimes are solved by catching someone in the act. The other 97% are solved through intelligence-led operations, and that requires information. And then there's just these amazing little spin-offs that we notice, like you just mentioned. We going through the data, we realized the previous unit that used to be here before the hunting operation failed, the males had a lot of antagonistic behavior from wildlife in the area. And we were noticing that the animals were very calm around all female patrols. And look, at the moment, this is an observation. It's still something that we haven't quantified. But when we did discuss it with the local university, the professor of ecology there is like, well, what's been hunting animals for tens of thousands of years? It's generally been men. And
fascinating, eh?
Yeah, well, we don't know, but if we quantify it scientifically, it just becomes another tool that area managers can use in trying to keep rangers safe from essentially what is one of the biggest threats they face, and that's ironically with the animals they're trying to protect.
So what's next for the Akashinga and your foundation? Obviously, it's a very challenging time for you at the moment, and certainly we want to try and see if we can push as many people, because I see so many words of encouragement coming through, and it seems like you've got a lot of people who are interested in and wanting to support you. But what is next for the Akashinga and your foundation?
So it was just expanding something that's working, trying to operate within safe projections of our operating budget and where we're going financially. Essentially, every $10,000 that we raise is another woman employed and deployed into the field for a year. And it's we getting into more and more of these long-term land contracts. And just protecting areas, protecting nature, and knowing that the footprint we have is not only protecting the area we're in, but having an influence over the entire ecosystem and even eco-regions. So it's about, I want to sit back here one day when I'm old and grey. We've got a bit of grey coming through, but I just want to play a part in helping to protect as much of the natural world as possible. And so for us, my job is looking at strategy, overall vision of the organisation, negotiating land contracts, and most importantly, fundraising. As much as I love being out there in the field, that is more and more limited now. We have such a big team of people that are driving those field operations. I go out and find the money, and the more money we find, the more land we protect.
It's interesting. I see Paul's just commented. Yeah, Paul is involved in protecting big tracts of land in the Amazon, and he was actually sharing a similar notion with regards to elephants reacting differently to men and women. So
really,
yeah.
Okay, Paul, can we connect?
Yeah, he's definitely worth connecting with, and an interesting character for you to meet.
I'd love to.
But Damien, mate, thanks so much for your time and your stories. I'm sure maybe there's time for one or two of the stories you talked about, and I guess this is just more from a personal interest from my side. You talked about some of the stories, the interviews that you had with some of these incredible women who are now such role models. Are there any stories you're able to share with regards to kind of some of these women in terms of what they went through before becoming a female ranger?
There's a couple. Every one of them has a story, and I suppose in their own way is as tough as the next. And as someone who's spent their life training people and putting them through hardship, you learn that the distance that a person can place between suffering and breaking is what defines the spirit or the character of an individual, and that's what these women have in spades, and that's all we need as rangers is spirit and character, and we train the rest. We look at a young woman, Kelly, raped at the age of 16, became pregnant, unable to look after the child financially. So in Shona culture, it's taken from her and given to the parents of the father. And she hadn't. Her daughter's name was or is Yearn Cleopatra, and she hadn't seen Yearn for 2.5 years. She came to us. She graduated training, and these women have been given no concessions with selection. We trained them harder because in the eyes of most they had more to prove. She passed selection, she became a ranger, she saved the money, she bought some land, she built a house. We took this case to court, and she left court with her daughter and with full custody of the child that she hadn't seen for 2.5 years, and took her back to her own house. And yeah, that
Sure.
that for us that's all the fuel I need is to be able to see those turnarounds, those results. Dianette, another woman, she was taken at 14 as a child bride, raped and beaten repeatedly until the age of 19. By the time that she had 4 children, she was sent away by the chief to live with her grandmother for her own protection. So removed from her children and husband, who wanted to keep the kids. Not one to want to condone violence, but when she graduated from training with us, she drove back to the house. A group of women waited out the front of the house, and she went back into the house by herself. She kicked the shit out of the husband, kicked him out of the house, took the house and the kids, and he hasn't been seen back there since.
Good for her. No wonder even your brutal selection courses were no match for these young, strong women.
Yeah.
There's one question which I think we'll get to, because I think it's quite poignant. There's a question coming through that's asking about the education. How do we educate the Asian population with regards to not using animals with regards to medicinal purposes?
Do you know, there's our dance space is on the ground here, running operations that protect large tracts of land, and through community and women's empowerment, or training instructors. There's organisations that specialise in marketing and demand reduction as much as we specialise in what we do on the ground. And if you look at there's the international trafficking side, there's demand reduction, there's on the ground community development, policy and law. These are all different angles that we work in an industry where we're never going to be out of work, unfortunately. And everyone that works in the industry wants to be out of work. We want to see an end to this. But as long as there's a value on these animal parts and these animals, we're going to have to keep fighting a fight that is going to go till the end of our lives. And look at an organisation like Wild Aid in Asia, doing amazing work in demand reduction, and that demand reduction is as important as what we do on the ground here. But for us to go and try and do something over there would dilute the effectiveness of what we do on the ground.
There's a comment here from India saying, someday come help us create our own version of Akashingas in India. It will help us save so much time and lives. So that's a very nice comment coming through.
I read an article many years ago, again in the New York Times, and the title was just "Add Women and Stir." So maybe just try that recipe.
I love that. Well, mate, I want to thank you again so much for your time. There have been a lot of people tuning in this evening. So I guess the final question is, how can we support you? It's a really, really challenging time. For those of you who follow my account, we've put a link in our bio. You can click on that link and it will take you to the donate page. But how else can we help you?
Yeah, look, just being aware, listening to the podcast, learning about what's going on with wildlife trafficking, the plight of nature, the decisions we make in our own life, small decisions in our lives mean big changes in others. nature takes billions of years to evolve. We've got a simple lifetime to evolve, to cut away the bits that don't work, keep the bits that do, and keep moving forward and grow. And I think as individuals, we need to do that. We can't keep treating the world, the planet, nature the way we have been and expect that things are going to keep turning out good. We're getting taught right now. We're getting lessons. So whether it's just changing our own habits and doing good things doesn't give us credits to do bad things. Whether it's just changing the way we behave or our outlook on nature, we really need to reflect on that. And if people want to support what we're doing, then please jump into the link there. We're the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, and this is what we do.
Damien, thanks so much for your time, mate. It's been a pleasure learning a little bit more about your narrative, as well as the great work you're doing, and I hope at some stage we can meet face to face.
Awesome, James. No, pleasure, man. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the listeners and all those that care about what we're talking about.
All right, mate. Take care and keep well.
Cheers, man.